Okay, so now at this point, we've basically pulled all of our code. It's all in Lect 11. And we've been able to run our app. So again, we're going to do an npm run watch. Then we're going to open up a new terminal, cd into Lect 11, then do python app.py. And then we're going to refresh here. And then we should see the same stuff that we saw in lecture 10. Basically just the random number, send up the random number. It's not even doing anything right now, but it doesn't matter what it's doing pretty much. Okay, so let's actually go and see what the code's doing. So as usual, we'll start in our app.py, and we see a couple differences from usual. So we see a SQL user and password. So that's the same as what we've configured already. So we should have our values inside of SQL.env. Then we have a DB user, which is basically our username, and that works too. Cool. Then we configure our database URI. Then we're basically saying db equals SQLAlchemy.app, or sorry, SQLAlchemy of app. And app is just our regular Flask app. So basically all we're saying at this point is our database is connected to an app. So again, SQLAlchemy is an ORM. It's an object relational mapper, which basically says I'm going to take objects from one thing, from one programming language, one technology, and map it into another. So it's going to map our SQL, our Postgres, into our Python. Cool. So then inside of index, we're basically saying models.db.create. So let's go ahead and open up models. So I think that should be, should be out here. So models is this file, and it says .db.createAll. So what this is going to do is basically going to come down here, and it's going to be like, cool, if this table doesn't already exist, create the table. So the table is going to basically have two different rows or two different columns, ID and address. And then the way that it maps it, so again, the ORM is going to translate this into Python. So you specify a value A when you make it, and that's going to make a USPS class inside of app.py. Then whenever you end up adding these things by calling db.session.add, it's just going to make those inside of SQL. So then we're initializing three values. We're initializing the White House, we're initializing my old address in New York, and then we're initializing NJIT. For all of those addresses, we're just doing a db.session.add, which will basically say, hey, I made these Python objects, push them to SQL. Then once we do that, we're going to call db.session.commit. So that's just going to say, we're done with everything that I wanted to change. Let's go ahead and do that. But we're not using any of these values. All we're doing is saying flask.renderTemplate index.html. So again, if we go up to index.html, so that should be in templates, then we're going to see content, we're going to see all of that stuff, and that's the same as last time, so I'm not going to go over that. But basically it's saying ignore all of this stuff that we did and instead just display this. So let's go ahead and actually change this to something that we care about. Let's do it the bad way first. So let's go ahead and do something like this. And then inside of here, we're going to do, we have our body tag just like before. So I'm going to go ahead and do something like this. And so we have our HTML, and then inside of there, we want to do different things. So let's go ahead and say, let's go ahead and make a string first of all. So return string equals this. And then inside of there, I'm also going to do, so we're going to add the closing tag inside of there. So now that we have that base stuff set up with ret string equals HTML and stuff inside of there, we're just going to actually want to use our different objects that we've created. So the way that we're going to do that is let's get all the addresses from the DB. So let's say DB addresses equals models.usps.query.all. And then basically within this, we're just going to say for DB address in DB addresses, what we're going to do is basically say ret string plus equals, and then let's go ahead and do an li inside of here. And then let's add a db address dot dot address. And then let's close out our li tag. And then that should basically work. But let's just make sure, let's just wrap this all inside of a UL, or an ordered list, if you will. Or an unordered list. Let's do an unordered list, and then let's close out that unordered list. So it's going to look something like this. Let's go ahead and try running this. Let's see what happens. So I already have debug equals true, so this should pick up the changes. Then let's do that. Oh, right, so we didn't return this. So let's just go ahead and return ret string. Okay, great. So now we're basically seeing this ordered list, or an unordered list of all the things that we want. So that's how we're going to use databases in our class. So we added them up here, and then we were able to query them right here. Obviously, we could have just done addresses in here and not actually done the query at all. That would have worked completely fine, but for the purposes of this demo, we did the add and the querying. Now, we're able to do this in bad HTML this way. We can also do it in, we can do a very simple thing where we just pass this into render templates and then give it as a list to index.html. All of that is fine. All of that is great. But one thing that we want to start doing is figuring out how we can pass these lists into socket.io. So that's what we're going to do next. But before we do that, I want to specify one more thing, which is basically, why do we see root duplicates? So we're clearly seeing this 4 times. The reason we're seeing that is every time we call this, it's going to be adding this over and over. So if I save this and then rerun it, now you're going to see a 5th one. So you're basically going to see it being added every single time we run the app. That's just the way that it is right now. Instead of doing it once, we're just doing it over and over. There are ways to prevent that, but we're not going to be going into that. That's not in the scope of this lecture. Sorry. And you generally don't want to have to worry too much about that, because you're not going to do that. You're not going to do logic like this, just hard-coded adding things every time inside of here. So next we're going to be talking about how we might be able to use sockets to communicate these changes to React.